moderating the panel because I at one point was a journalist, and I also do writing and reporting sometimes. So really thrilled to have folks here. I think I'm just gonna pass it down the line, and folks are gonna share a little bit about their thoughts and experiences, and then we'll do some Q&A. I have some questions, and then we'll take questions from the audience.
Hi, so my name is Carter Doherty. I'm with Americans for Financial Reform for a few more days anyway, because I am changing jobs. But I am also on the steering committee for a Montgomery County local organization called Montgomery for All. We advocate for more housing, better transportation. This chiefly falls into the fighting for affordable housing and zoning reform and all that sort of stuff. I want to say thank you to Marceline, a great partner. I've worked with her in the context of AFR and also had occasion to call on her about local issues. And I'm going to try and channel a little bit of my experience as a journalist and talking about communications at the national level. And amid all the gloom, I do want to, I think, try to pep people up a little bit and take heart and say that in my experience, we can win this argument. It is very frustrating when, particularly at the national level, the policy apparatus is dysfunctional. The electoral apparatus is dysfunctional, really. But I do take heart that within our world of communications, we can win these arguments. And I'll give you a little anecdote about talking to reporters these days, which is a lot of them don't even pretend now that they are being, flat out lied to on a regular basis. I mean, they realize that they are in just a radically different environment and are finding ways to channel that. I know to many of us it's frustrating that they don't find better or more effective ways of channeling it. I would submit, particularly as a former reporter, that our problems go deeper than the media. But nevertheless, I tell you that by way of saying that your arguments in public are not in vain, and we can all wait the day when the political system is perhaps a bit more responsive at the national level. But I have also worked at the state level on these things, and I wanted to talk a little bit about about journalism, talking to reporters, how to use that in communications campaigns, along with things like social media and email and that sort of thing, although the next two panelists have a lot more smarter things to say about social media, I think, than I do. If there were one thing I wanted to leave with you, it's an exhortation to, when you're doing any communications campaign in the service of the goal, think very, very clearly about your audience. Because one corollary of the fragmented media world we live in is that you have to think much more carefully about how to reach your intended audience, because it's not like 50 years ago when the evening newscasts and the major papers sort of set the agenda. That was the universe of what was talked about. You won the argument there. It's sort of the political system was somewhat responsive anyway, and that is of course not the case now at all. I have a metaphor that I sometimes use, but I want to test it on the generations here. Whoever has heard of Schoolhouse Rock?
I think that says a lot about it.
Okay, all right. If you are too young and do not know Schoolhouse Rock, go to YouTube, check out the song "I'm Just a Bill," where a bill on the Hill steps of Capitol Hill narrates, this is how I become law. And there's a kind of what I've tended to call the Schoolhouse Rock version of political change, which is that if you educate the public, they'll be like the voters in that video that say, "Hey, Congressman, we need a bill." And then the congressman needs a bill, and then it goes through the processes and it becomes law. Like everyone in this room, you remotely understand advocacy, you understand that that's not how things roll. So as a practical matter, you want to put everything that you want your intended audience to see. Not only do you want to identify that audience, but then you want to put stuff in front of them. And this is something I emphasize in part by, and some get it, some don't. I try to be in close touch with our legislative people and what they need to put in front of congressional staff, members of Congress, like you used to be, flooding your inboxes, and regulators. At one point, the origins of a newsletter that I started were to influence the influencers, because there were a lot of people who were talking about the mini financial crisis we had in 2023. So I spent a lot of time trying to put stuff in front of those people because they got a lot of pickup in the media. And that sort of underscores something that I emphasize to people who come on working at AFR is that part of what we do is what I call legislative communications. You think you've got a great report, and I don't doubt it, but I'm suspecting that the fact sheet that I write based off that report will get more of a read among staff and legislators than your report. Now, a lot of this does come down to, in the media relations realm, dealing with journalists. And it was a surprise to me when I went from journalism to advocacy, how many people were very, very leery about dealing with journalists. But I've tried to learn to understand people's sensitivities and also to emphasize the strengths that they have. And what I would in general say about AFR, and probably about everybody in this room, is you have compelling stories. You do. And you are the David versus the Goliath, and you shouldn't be afraid to tell those stories. I can see how some people would sort of envision an adversarial role with the media, and we had this example in the last session about these goofballs, talking about squatters and Alec, and yes, there are bad journalists, who pursue that, but they can be sifted out with a little careful, actually some cursory Googling. It doesn't even have to be particularly careful research. But you should, in general, start from the premise that your message is a good one to be heard, a good one and should be heard. And then the second point I wanted to make about journalism is that in addition to thinking about journalism as a profession, you can also think about journalism as a way to behave, which is to say, even if you didn't work as a journalist, certainly if you didn't train as a journalist, and I did not train as a journalist, by the way, master's degree in modern European history here for the super useful stuff in life. But you can write for publication, or even for posting, like on LinkedIn, some of the things that you want to convey. You've got that good report, you've got good human stories. Write it like a feature story, put it out there, maybe even publish it in some hyper-local publication, or there's a decent number at the national level as well. I just recently finished ghosting something for a colleague who wrote a report on the role of Wall Street private equity in home care, sort of people who come in and help out elderly people, like my mother-in-law, and the abuses that occur there. And we're simply going to publish that as a sort of, I would call it a sort of editorial feature. It's going to have real stories, but it also makes the policy argument. And then, of course, there's the op-ed and opinion piece route that I'm sure a lot of people have gone through. But these are ways you can behave like a journalist, even if you're not in the professional sense a journalist, and get your message out there. I think I'm going to stop there. I'm going to take.
You've 1 minute left.
I'll start with one real quick thing, which is we do maintain an email list, as I'm sure many organizations do. Ours is a national one. We've built it up. I think it's now about 350,000 people. But we are experimenting more with sort of creating subsets of that list that can be relied on to take action on a particular issue in an ongoing campaign. You know, you've got a bill that's being proposed, or you're trying to stop a bill instead of a bill for these days. And you know, you identify the people who respond to your initial messages about that, sort of distill that, and call on those people, because you can you know, get a sense, digitally speaking, that they care about the issue. And that again is one thing where your communications tool is the email channel. The thing you're communicating is an email, and you know, might be through some software, you know, taking action. But those are, again, communications, not just journalism, it's you behaving like it, and then also these sorts of different channels. I will stop there.
Thank you so much. All right, we're gonna turn it over to Carrie.
Hi everyone, I'm Carrie Dara. I'm the Senior Communications Officer at Horizon Foundation. I've worked my whole career kind of at the intersection between communications and public policy, advocacy campaigns. Spent many years down in Annapolis as well. And the Horizon Foundation, we're based here in Howard County. We're the Community Health Foundation here. And if you're wondering, you're a health foundation, what are you doing at this conference? It's because a couple of years ago, we went through this big strategic planning process that involved a lot of community engagement, where we went out to folks and asked them basically the question, what is keeping you from living a long and healthy life? What are some of the barriers that you're facing? All with a focus on particularly racial equity and anti-racism. And one of the biggest issues that came up was housing, general cost of living issues, food insecurity, all that kind of stuff, in addition to some other, you know, more healthcare related things that we've worked on for a while. And so we're getting involved in all those issues. The community told us that these are issues here and we want you to work on them. So that's how we got connected to Marceline. My colleague Christina's here as well, who's working with all of our housing folks and doing some great work there. So I will not pretend to be a subject matter expert on things like housing and economic insecurity, but coming from the health lens, that is what we're working on now. And in terms of our role in advocacy, we work a lot, both locally here in Howard County and at the state level, focusing on partnerships and doing this policy work in coalitions. So I know there's another panel going on right now about organizing and coalition work. So this is kind of, next to that. But we always try to work with other groups whenever we can and involve the community in our work whenever we can. And what we've kind of found throughout the years in all of our policy success is that coalition building and organizing is as critical to our communication success as it is for any policy success. And if I can give a brief example, bear with me here, on a separate issue. Last year, if anybody worked during legislative session, I don't have to tell you that the big issue of the year was the terrible state budget. It was an absolute mess, and a whole lot of things were getting cut that shouldn't have been, and there was a lot of groups playing defense on that and trying to restore the cuts that they could. And one of those areas that kind of got swept up into that big mess was mental health system, and a lot of different cuts that were proposed to try to balance the state budget. And mental health is an area that the foundation has worked in for probably 12 to 15 years. And we worked with other groups on that issue, on legislation to advance things like, if you've heard of the 908 crisis lifeline, all sorts of other things. And when we came together, when we realized all these little different cuts were happening, we realized that all these different cuts, if some groups cared about this particular piece of it, some groups cared about that particular piece of it, but when we all came together, we realized, wait, this is representing a $120 million cut to the mental health system here in Maryland if these cuts go forward. And realizing that is a much stronger message to put out there together than individual groups advocating for the little piece that they cared most about. So we came together and we amplified that message. And we realized that it was best to do that by working to the strengths of each of the groups that were involved. And this is where your organizing and coalition building comes in. We know that some groups have the really strong relationships with legislators and could handle meeting with them. Some groups had the really strong relationships with the media, and they could organize a press conference and get the media to show up at that press conference. Some groups were really good at messaging, which I know we're going to talk about, for testimony and showing up at hearings to testify. Some groups were more direct service and had strong relationships with clients on the ground with lived experience using some of these mental health services that were at risk now, and then could build that trust and have that relationship with them to say, can you come up to this press conference and tell your story? And somebody did. They came up and said, I use 988 and it saved my life. And if that service wasn't there, I wouldn't be either. And then you have groups like us who were able to sort of amplify those messages, get a lot of grassroots advocacy involved, social media ads, which I know we're going to talk about as well. All of that to say, I know a lot of folks here are doing incredible work and might not necessarily have enormous budgets to do that work, certainly might not have enormous comm staffers to do all this type of work for you. And the benefit of working in coalition with folks is that you don't have to be great at everything. You don't have to be great at all those little individual pieces. You can work to your strengths and use the benefit of working with others to sort of come together, amplify that message so more people hear it, and policymakers also then see your strength in numbers as well. So I'll stop there. I know we're going to get into more with individual questions.
Great. I'm Alice Wilkerson. I'm the Executive Director of Advanced Maryland, and I don't consider myself to be a comms expert, but I am going to tell you a lot about messaging and communications. But I really come to this after spending a lot of time in the General Assembly in different roles. And one of the things that really stood out to me after working as staff, after working as a lobbyist, is how important the message is and how typically under-resourced communications are for advocacy, for the type of work that we are all doing. And so I sort of accidentally got into communications and messaging because when I got involved with the organization and we were really thinking about what our purpose is, it was to do the things that aren't being done. And so that is how we operate. So Advanced Maryland, we really try to think of ourselves as filling gaps in advocacy. And communications, messaging is always a gap. We are on about a dozen coalitions. We work with a lot of people here. Housing is a big issue for us. Also utilities. I didn't know which breakout session to go to because we do a lot of communications for both issues. And there's never enough, no one is resourced appropriately for communications work. And so we really try to come in and be the coalition partner that takes on that piece of it. If somebody else has that expertise, we are happy to let them do that and we'll go do something else. But messaging is such a core component to the work that we all do. If you're doing advocacy of any kind, you're doing messaging, right? You're not talking about, anytime you're talking about your bill, your organization, the issues that you work on, that is all messaging. So you don't have to think of yourself as a communications expert or, to be thinking about messaging. We all do messaging all the time. It is the pitch that you give to a legislator in a meeting. It's the opening paragraph of your testimony. It is, the little sound bites that you are going to give to the media when you're talking to them. And if you happen to have the staff capability, capacity to do some social media posts, it's your messaging is part of the short caption that you have to, put on your social media. So we are all doing messaging all of the time anyway. And so, one of the things that we really try to do and, what I'm gonna try and bring to the conversation is what can we be doing better, but what are the things that we should be paying the most attention to when we're thinking about, our communications and our messaging. And I think one of the things that I think is really hard, especially for the types of issues that you all are working on, is these are complicated topics. It's complicated. I mean, just sitting in the housing session, it is really complicated. There's so many different components that are going on. So much of it is legal. The utilities piece. I have been working on utilities and messaging for a number of years. Please don't ask me to talk about like the PSC and PJM and like any of that stuff. Like, immediately I am lost, and yet here I am doing messaging on it. And so it's really complicated. There's so much to talk about, and like real people are involved and real people's lives, and it just feels so critically important. And so we all feel this obligation to like explain, like you have to, whoever we can get, whoever attention we can get, we just have to get you so I can explain everything that you really need to know about this issue because it is so critical. And so that is one of our biggest challenges, is because those big explanations, they don't get through. They don't catch the attention. Like, we're not going to get someone to fully understand everything that we know about our topic that's living in our head, the services that we do, the things that we see every day. We're not gonna get that. We're not gonna convey it in our 10 or 15-minute meeting or in 2-minute testimony in the legislature. So we have to come back and think about, well, then how do we talk about these really complicated things? It is hard. So one of the things, if you look in your program, there is a QR code for our little section. There it is. It's gonna take you to a link tree so that you can get a couple of resources. There's two.
Thank you, Alice, for that.
Well, so one is a worksheet that we use all the time when we're doing breakout sessions with people on different issues. It's a Google Doc. Copy it, use it. And it really walks you through some steps about what we sort of think of as like your message sandwich. It helps to start, you need a core message, right? Like you need 1 or 2 core messages that are what we call evergreen, meaning they work now, 3 months before session starts. They're gonna work in January when your bill is introduced. They're gonna work at your hearing, even if there's amendments on the table. They're gonna work after your hearing. They're gonna work at a bill signing, or they're gonna work next summer when you're explaining the bill again. They're evergreen, they are always true. So they don't change with, all of the things that can happen in a legislative session. And so you want 2, 3 at the most, but you really only need 2 core messages that go with whatever your issue is. We're gonna talk, we've talked a lot about legislation, so we'll use that as the example. But that worksheet helps you to develop what we do in a sandwich, which is your core message. You open with a value. We should always lead with our values, especially when we're talking about issues, relating to like economic security and justice. The economy is always going to resonate. This is always going, these are always going to be winning issues. There are so many values that go with it. Identify your value. Keep that value. That's what your opening is. Because when you're trying to get someone to hear what it is that you're gonna say, they are going to judge, and their brain is gonna decide how much they're going to listen to what you have to say based on the first few words out of your mouth, based on the first 2 sentences in your statement. So, it needs to be a value that tells them, I agree, I'm hooked. I agree with this opening value statement, now I'm going to learn more. And so we make a sandwich. Value, explain your issue, what are we gonna do about it? That's the sandwich. And so take a look at that worksheet, because it helps you try to think through those things. It's a brainstorming document, and then it's supposed to get you down to creating that sandwich at the end. We put some information in there. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to provide some more guidance about it. To go with it, and you're like, well, how do I figure out what the value is? Well, how do I explain my issues? There's another document in there. It is longer. You don't have to read it start to finish, but you can see some of the things that stick out. It is from We Make the Future, and it is a messaging guide, and it talks about lots of different topics. Many of them are gonna be applicable to people who are here. It has some good do's and don'ts in there, and it has good framing for how you're, these are some words to use when you're talking about these particular issues that resonate with people. You know, like hardworking people, that resonates really well. We always want to talk about hardworking people. People like to hear that they work hard. Like that, right? It resonates for them. You know, so it just has like some really good language around, you know, that you can use and pick up. So hopefully you can put those tools together. And then some of the other things that we will talk about. Yeah. So I will say one quick thing to add to it, because we probably won't get to it. Please stop repeating opposition talking points in order to make your point. You do not have to do this, ever. You shouldn't do it. We call this deficit-minded messaging. It loses every time. Don't do it, okay? You can make your point, but keeping it in a positive frame, leading with your values, and, you know, talk about that, like, you own the field. You don't have to go to the place that someone is inviting you to talk about. Like, the reporter gives you a question you don't like, you don't have to answer it. You have the power to just be like, you know what? The really important thing that we all need to know is, and then you put it back on your playing field, right? Like, you're in charge. So, same thing. Never, ever repeat your opposition talking points in order to make your point. You don't need to rebut them. You don't need to say what they're saying. You don't need to say what landlords are saying in order to say why we need, you know, to pass legislation protecting tenants. We can always lead with why we just need to protect people, and you can get around to it later. So, I'm gonna make sure I
Perfect.
hit that.
Perfect. So I'm gonna ask a couple questions of everybody, and then we're gonna leave plenty of time for folks to also ask questions, because I think I am one of those organizations that I am part of our comms team. Our tenant advocacy director is our website master as well. Our deputy director is also part of our comms team. And so it is challenging sometimes, particularly when resources are scarce and people are struggling to figure out how to use messaging to get our advocacy points across, what to do first. I think social media particularly is an area that people really struggle with. It feels hard, it's hard to keep up with, and to even know where the right place is to engage, because it's changing. So if folks could talk about some simple ways to use social media for messaging and moving policy, that would be great. And I'm passing these to everybody, so. Whoever wants to start.
Want each of us to give a tip?
Give a tip. Each of you can give a tip, and yeah,
Okay.
or an example.
Staffers with short attention spans frequently would do Twitter threads, you know, threading together 6 or 8 tweets that would sort of sum up the key points in something. Here's the document below if you really want to dive in. But that was, speaking as a card-carrying member of Gen X, how I sometimes conceived of a millennial or Gen Z staff.
Awesome.
I think it gets back to your point earlier about knowing your audience and knowing where your audience lives and gets its information. So you don't have to have all 12 main social media accounts if your audience isn't there. Like, take a look at your engagement numbers, and if it's, for us, for whatever reason, still here in Howard County, it's still Facebook, although it's growing in LinkedIn and Instagram as well. But take a look at those things and see where your audience is, and devote your time and your resources and your efforts to those specific platforms. And I'll add one other thing if I can real quick.
Yep.
Email is not dead, especially when it comes to advocacy.
Yeah.
And when it comes to email, that is your direct line of communication to your audience who has already opted in and said, I want to hear from you. And it is not at the mercy of whatever tech billionaire decides to do with the algorithm that day. You can speak directly to the people who have already said, we want to hear from you. So, and it's very effective still when it comes to advocacy, because you can have a very direct message. You can say, call your representative and tell them this. You can say, click here to sign this petition or do this action alert, and all those types of things. So email is not dead.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think it's audience, but also like what your goals are. So, you know, who are you trying to reach? Because if you're trying to reach legislators, I don't know that social media is going to be the best way to get them, especially now that, you know, it would have been Twitter. We would have all, like, since Twitter is no longer Twitter. Now social media has really dispersed. And so where we used to have a larger concentration between Twitter and Facebook of people, now we have large numbers of people, but they are across many, many different platforms. And so, think about what your goals are, think about what your audience, looks like. And so if Facebook is what's working for you, stick to Facebook. Even if people are like, oh no, you should be on Instagram. You know where your engagement is. If you're like posting something on Instagram, you're not getting the engagement, then you don't have to go there. So you don't have to be in all the places. Pick two. Pick two that like are a little bit different, and you can repeat the same content. So if you put it one place, you can put it the other place too. But the thing about social media is you have to keep the engagement going. It doesn't need to be every day, but you should have at least something once a week. It's also not hard for your engagement to be reposting other people. That's okay. Interacting with other accounts is part of engagement. It's also part of what gets you seen. If you post 10 times, but you don't interact with anyone else, then your posts aren't going to get seen as if you, if you posted 3 times and then interacted with a bunch of other accounts, those 3 posts will get seen more than the other 10. So pay attention to how it's working for you, and if it's not working, then don't put your time in it, pivot to something else.
And I'm gonna talk about one example, and then I wanna keep this conversation for a second, because I think it's confusing. One thing we did really effectively last year is we used social media ads. Do I like giving money to Mark Zuckerberg? I do not. Did I give money to Mark Zuckerberg? I did. And what I found is by putting not a ton of money into Facebook ads, we got 600 new subscribers to our email list, and we generated hundreds and hundreds of emails to legislators around a bill that we were having a really hard time getting much traction on until they heard from constituents who were not engaged with us before that on a mortgage bill that we didn't like. And so it helped us with our subscriber base in terms of getting new supporters, and it helped us because the bill got dramatically narrowed down because they were hearing from constituents. So I think that's a really good thing. And I know we were talking a little bit before the session. I think, Alice, you were talking a little bit about using Canva to comment and Reels cutting through messaging. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so you can use Canva to create your content. And Canva is there's a lot you can do for free on Canva. Paying for Canva, it's not that expensive, especially for all the things you get out of it. And Canva, you can go in and you're like, I want to make an Instagram post. And Canva's like, here's the Instagram template. And so then you just make it in that template so that you know that you got it right. So you're not posting something on Instagram and now it's squished and your image doesn't look great. So Canva really does help hold your hand a bit if you feel adventurous enough to try and make some of your own graphics, and they give you all of the stuff that you can play with. It's a really fancy version of Paint. We're gonna go really way back. It's so much better than so it's great. You don't have to be afraid is my point.
So with a palette and brushes, right?
Yeah, old school, Microsoft. I don't use Apple, I'm sure that's obvious. So Canva and Reels. So Reels are actually quite easy to make. The one thing that you have to do is get over putting yourself on camera. Or you can be like me. At this point, I've convinced several members of my staff to put themselves on camera. I have not gone on camera yet. I'm sure it's coming. And that, you need a script. You write a script. How you write a script? Watch some Reels and be like, I liked how this person did this. I like this. Great, go do it. Go replicate it. And you write a script, and you put it gives you a teleprompter basically. So you load your script, and so you can be looking at your phone. You record yourself talking. You just need a reel, and your reels are going to get so much more engagement than your graphics and things do because it gets fed into the algorithm, and they also will keep feeding it to someone. If you think about you're scrolling on Facebook and something pops up and you're like, when did this happen? and you realize it was from 3 months ago and you missed it, like the reels just keep going. That doesn't happen for your posts. Your posts, you posted it in June, it's way back there in June, it's not gonna come up fresh for anybody. But reels keep coming back up, and then when people engage with them, then they come back again. So like right now, like a whole bunch of people have realized like, oh, I've seen Bernie Sanders like reels, and they're like years old. But now they're back in circulation because he's gotten popular again. So, you know, reels are definitely worth the time if you can get over being on camera, and speaking, you know, looking at yourself and listening to yourself.
And I think, Carrie, you had talked a little bit about the coalition work, but can you talk a little bit about like messaging in coalition and like working in coalition to amplify messaging?
Sure, yeah, I think, like the example I gave earlier, it was all about coming to what is your big overarching, like 1 or 2 shared core messages that all of you agree on, and that you don't necessarily have to, especially if you're working with a lot of different groups, don't have to have every person going into the Google Doc and, you know, doing their track changes, because that is like my nightmare. But, can you have, you know, 1 or 2 set core messages that everybody is saying, no matter what their like niche is, like no matter what angle they're coming at it with. I would say start there. And then, you know, and especially in advocacy work, you know, all of your other groups are still gonna be able to say what they wanna say in their meetings with legislators to their own audiences, knowing what they care about. So I would say, start first with what is your big overarching shared goal? What is your big overarching shared message that is going to get the most amount of attention from the most amount of places? If I could add one more thing.
Yeah, of course.
Social media ads.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to spend a lot of money on advertising, and unfortunately, social media has become a lot more pay to play than it used to be, where if you just post something and post it, you're not gonna get a lot of engagement on it, and unless you're like, you know, very, very popular on the internet. So a lot of times, especially for advocacy, if you want it to be seen by a bigger audience, you do have to put some money behind it. The good news is that it doesn't have to be a ton of money, based on how, particularly with, you know, Instagram and Facebook, they have pretty sophisticated targeting tools, where you could go in and when you're setting up the ad and say, I want to reach members of this demographic, you know, adults over 30 who say they are interested in XYZ, whatever the issue is. And you can kind of adjust your budget and see, like, if I spend an extra $50 on this post, how many more people is it going to reach? And it's gonna give you those parameters. So it's unfortunate, you do have to give Mark Zuckerberg some money, but it doesn't have to be a ton.
If you are doing that though, and you're telling people to contact their legislator, just know that that is grassroots lobbying activity. And so you need to account for the money spent in your ethics reports.
That is correct.
Thank you for that.
And certain ads, at least when we did them, they wouldn't allow us to run them depending on how we phrased the ask. So you have to think carefully about what we're asking. Like we're like, we hate zombie mortgages, but there couldn't be a bill number attached, and we'd be like, find out, you know. So stuff, you know, there's stuff like that you have to play with a little bit. But I think like the juice was worth the squeeze in that point for stuff like us. Can we talk a little bit about, like Carter, when you've talked a little bit about not being afraid when you're talking to journalists, like how do you pitch them? And then for other folks too, like some kind of do's and don'ts around like journalists or talking to journalists or things to think about.
So the first thing I would say, and here I have on the brain sort of advocacy at the state level, is do think very careful about the timeliness of where you're going with a pitch. You know, this might happen conceivably, possibly, maybe in 9 months. You know, like I'm going to surmise here that it's hard to pitch a reporter right now on something that's going to happen in the Maryland General Assembly in the next session, right? It's months away.
Yeah.
So you got to think about that. But at the same time, you know, you do want to give some advance warning. There's going to be a big fight over this bill in the General Assembly. You know, that can sometimes lead to sort of what in the trade is called walk-up stories. You know, previewing the fight to be happening. Reporters always love a fight. What was the corollary to your question? The second part? It was Oh, and
General tips.
just general things behind, yeah, so timeliness, I think it never hurts to give reporter a heads up about what's coming, on the presumption that you don't know exactly what they're following. Particularly if you feel comfortable giving some hint that's not in the public domain. I don't think I am divulging a big secret when I suggest that from time to time, communications people like myself have been known to get their people into the media by going to the reporter and saying, it's not public yet, but this thing is going to happen on this day. And they say, oh, I was busy with something else. Thank you for the heads up. And there is an implicit quid pro quo there. So we have strong opinions about this. Oh yeah, I'd love to hear them. this sort of thing. So don't hesitate to do that. You should make if it makes you feel more comfortable. There is a case for saying, can I speak to you for background? Starting out that way, and don't be afraid to do that. But to get back to my original point, when you're talking the substance of what you're saying, why you think this thing, what your values are, why you think this thing is important, what is going on, don't hesitate to say it loud, proud, and on the record.
Awesome. Other folks, any tips or tricks for pitching, or getting journalist interests?
Don't have your email pitch be 5 paragraphs long. Keep it short and sweet and try to, again, get to the point really quickly. They're very busy and covering a lot of things. And also just basic, know their beat and make sure you're pitching a reporter that actually covers your issue. And because, and I'm not saying that to say you don't already know that, but just, reporters get reassigned to different topics all the time. So make sure that you've done your research and that you know what their current beat is. You maybe even look back on, recent stories that they've done about that topic and say, hey, I saw this piece that you did. Here's a great follow-up to it. Or here, I know you already have written about this issue. Here's another thing that you might interested in.
Yeah, so I would just add, if you're having trouble cutting through, you're like, I don't really know where to start with some things. Press statements can kind of just help you get seen. It's not a full press release. Something's happening. It relates to your issue. Press is gonna cover it. Somebody else is having a press conference, especially if it's a, government entity, some actions taking place, there was a decision, there's a court case, something like that. You can put out a statement that's really short and just send it out, but you wanna make sure you're getting out enough in advance that it would hit before somebody's writing their story. Because they might never know, they maybe went to the press conference, they're covering the thing that's already happening, and then they're like, ooh, I can just pull this quote. And so you might find that you show up in an article that nobody talked to you about it, but now you're there. It can help you to cut through, and then maybe they don't do anything with you the first 2 or 3 times, but then something's coming up, they know that you've written to them about this several times, now you might actually get a phone call. And they say, hey, we're looking for someone to quote on this, to talk to, could we talk to you about this? So we have been able to make some inroads with press when we were having a challenge, getting heard and building those relationships. I think one of the things we talked about too in our planning call was, if you get to know members of the press, there is a lot of value in you being able to tell them who to talk to. It doesn't always have to be you. I talk to press all the time. My goal is to never be the one quoted. I can give a lot of background, but I have lots of relationships with people, and so I can say, the person you really need to talk to is. And then pass it off and introduce that reporter. They love that. I now get phone calls for things that are only tangential to what I work on, and they're like, hey, this isn't quite your thing, but I thought maybe you would know. And anytime I get on the phone with press, it's good. I'm gonna get something out of it. I'm giving them something, but I always get something out of that. It's also, I think, really important, if you are someone who is in a position where you are often called by the press, where you are often quoted by the press, We also have a responsibility to stop and think about whether or not we're the right people to be, quoted. And especially if you work with directly impacted communities, if you work with service providers, if you work with people who are very close to this issue in a way that you aren't, you need to be passing press to those people. Don't do it without, prepping that person and knowing that you can do it. Don't have press cold call, a client or anything like that. But like, we should be doing that. We need to diversify who media speaks to, and, have more representation. It's easy for them to call up the same 5 people. I've got a number of issues and I'm like, that we work on, and I can pretty much tell you who the press is gonna quote every single time. And so, we always wanna try and get other people in front of them, and so that can be your value. It doesn't have to just be you speaking, but to say, hey, I saw this story, you quoted these people. Next time you're writing about that, I have, 2 or 3 people that you really should hear from. Let me know. I would love to put you in touch.
I learned from a German reporter the phrase, all-purpose weapon. And if you see somebody quoted a lot, they've become an all-purpose weapon for the media, and they need to be deployed less frequently. I also learned from, coming from journalism and coming into the advocacy world, organizers taught me the phrase, organize people where they are. And the same principle applies to journalists. This journalist is in a position where they've never heard you. So you send them, Alice sends them a statement, now they've heard of you. And, maybe they pick up the phone next time you call. Like, it is the sort of the process of engagement.
And I would just say, like, sometimes one of the things I've been successful at is if somebody put out a story and I have some expertise, I may follow up with them whether or not they reached out to me or not. There was an article on auto insurance, and they didn't talk to me, and I personally thought there were some things they were missing, but I wasn't, the way I approached it was like, thank you so much, this is a great article, I was so happy to see you cover this issue. We actually wrote 3 reports about this. I would be happy to talk to you to share some other issues that weren't addressed in that article. And we had coffee, and I gave him the information, and because of his beat, he also does some other issues. So like, he will reach out to me now on a couple of different sets of issues. But again, it wasn't like, you got it wrong. It was like, let me be a resource to you to fill in additional information that you may not be aware of or that you didn't know. And I think that's an important thing as well.
Hunting out vinegar, even if you really dislike the first story.
Yep, exactly. Because sometimes they don't know when they're busy too. I mean, I think about it sometimes, like, again, going back to relational, like the same way that we coach clients and supporters. When you're meeting with a legislator, they are a legislator and they have a lot of power, but they're also a person, and you're building a relationship. So you have the first meeting and you let them know who you are, and then you follow up because you're building a relationship. And the same with journalists. You're building a relationship with somebody. You don't want it to be an antagonistic relationship necessarily. You want to recognize they're really busy, they're looking for a quote, they've got their weapons, so you need to like give them more people to talk to, and approaching it from that kind of mindset. I know we've got about 20 minutes left, so I have more questions, but I'd love to open it up to other folks to see if people have questions.